On an ordinary morning in the town, the sun barely seeped through hazy clouds. The branches of trees standing silently along the roads swayed gently in the wind, and an almost tangible tension hung in the air. Footsteps echoed through a high school's corridors, merging with the sharp ring of the bell. Students rushed about trying to make it to class on time. But in the midst of all this normalcy, someone moved down the hall step by deliberate step, Wendesday Adams. Her very presence changed the atmosphere. Long black hair fell in two braids over her shoulders, and with her black and white clothes, she looked as if she'd stepped out of another century. There was no expression on her pale face, yet the depth in her eyes made those around her avert their gaze at once. As she passed a classroom door, laughter spilled out from within. She paused, tilted her head, and the faintest, almost imperceptible twitch touched her lips. Wendesday's brother Pugsley writhed inside a hallway locker. Pain contorted his face. His eyes were wide with fear and his breathing uneven. He had been stuffed into the locker with a rag jammed in his mouth. Hearing his muffled sounds, Wendesday yanked the metal door open. She fixed her cold, razor-sharp gaze on her brother. Pugsley looked up at her, pleading for help with his eyes. Wendesday pulled out the rag. "Who did this?" she asked. Her voice carried less worry than a deep, simmering anger. Pugsley managed to whisper a few names, the bullies from the football team. In that instant, Wendesday's eyes hardened. Her face remained impassive, but the fury rising inside her seemed to cast a shadow against the corridor's cold walls. She would not let this humiliation of her brother go unpunished. Vengeance ran in the Adams blood, and Wendesday made sure it was felt. In the next scene, the school's outdoor pool was primed for a swim practice. Students cheered and shouted around the water, the air thick with excitement and energy. Amid this lively atmosphere, Wendesday appeared silently at the edge. In her hand was an aquarium jar, shadows flickering within, the quick bodies of piranhas. With cool, measured steps, she approached the pool. Her gaze was flat, but the sense of reckoning she carried flashed in her eyes. Without the slightest hesitation, she poured the jar into the water. Within seconds, the shouts pierced the sky. The water churned, screams erupted. One swimmer cried out in pain. The piranha's small, sharp teeth had sunk into his skin. The pool's clear water turned red in moments. As the crowd scattered in panic, Wendesday stood calmly at the edge, watching without the faintest sign of remorse. To her, this was simply justice executed. Police sirens tore through the town's quiet shortly afterward. Wendesday was taken into custody. Sitting in the back of the squad car, she stared out the window at the scenery rushing past, her face devoid of emotion. But only one thought filled her mind. Anyone who laid a hand on her brother would pay the price. At the station, Mother Morticia and Father Gomez Adams appeared. Their presence cast an uncanny gothic aura over the room. Morticia, in her long black dress and hauntingly beautiful pallor, seemed the very embodiment of night. Gomez, energetic and ardent, looked like her opposite, yet moved in perfect harmony with her. When they learned what their daughter had done, their faces showed not anger but a certain pride. Wendesday's act to them was bold, an act of retribution worthy of the family tradition. Still, they knew she could not remain at this school. Morticia told Wendesday about Nevermore Academy. It was no ordinary school. It was a secretive place where the different, the outcast and the gifted came together. Morticia herself had studied there, collecting both friendships and secrets within those stone walls. She believed it was the right place for Wendesday, where she could meet her own kind and explore her darkness more deeply. Wendesday listened without betraying a flicker of feeling. Inside her, the anger of being sent to another school clashed with the pull of Nevermore's mysterious call. Part of her knew no one could tame her. Another part felt the lure of the unknown secrets behind Nevermore's walls. The journey began. As the car's wheels traced the long, winding roads, the landscape around the town changed. The trees grew denser, the sky darker. Roadside signs seemed to point toward a hidden world in the distance. Wendesday sat silently in the back seat, her black eyes fixed on the shadowy view. Morticia leaned toward her, voice soft yet weighty. Nevermore will be a home for Adam's blood. Wendesday kept her lips still and her gaze on the window. At last, the Academy's grand gates appeared. Massive stone buildings, Gothic spires, and clinging ivy gave Nevermore a look as intimidating as it was mesmerizing. The forest surrounding the school, veiled in mist, whispered that this was more than a school. This was a fortress that kept dark secrets. Inside, Principal Larissa Weems greeted them. Tall, composed, authoritative, she drew attention at once. She and Morticia shared a history. The smile on her face was a diplomatic mask. When she looked at Wendesday, her eyes held both curiosity and caution. Wendesday's name had a way of casting a shadow wherever it went. Assigned her living space, Wendesday met Enid Sinclair, her polar opposite. With brightly colored hair, cheerful energy, and decorations that filled every corner with life, Enid was practically the embodiment of light. Posters on the walls, plush toys, vibrant knickknacks, everything glowed with color. When Wendesday set down her black suitcase, the room split into an ironic tableau. One side dark, simple, austere, the other vivid, lively, bursting with life. The contrast between the two roommates was the beginning of a long echoing opposition in Nevermore's halls. In her first days, Wendesday's encounters with other students were just as striking. Bianca Barclay, one of the school's most popular and powerful students, treated Wendesday with a cool, superior air. Bianca's siren blood gave her an allure that easily swayed those around her. Wendesday did not retreat an inch before that gaze. From the very first meeting, an invisible spark of rivalry flickered between them. In the school garden, she met Xavier Thorpe. He used his artistic talent to paint the visions he saw, pouring images of creatures and nightmares onto his canvases. As Wendesday spoke with him, her eyes held a wary interest. Xavier's drawings seemed to carry clues about the dark beings roaming the town. Then came the first vision that would change Wendesday's life. During a canoe race with other students, her sight suddenly dimmed. A bloody scene flashed in her mind. In the forest, a man was being torn apart by a massive creature. Screams echoed in her ears as her heart pounded. When her eyes cleared, she was still in the middle of the race, but her breath was uneven and her face pale. This vision was no mere dream. It was the echo of a real event. Indeed, news soon spread that a murder had occurred in town. A man had been found in the forest, torn to pieces. Authorities tried to pass it off as an animal attack, but the images in Wendesday's mind pointed to a very different truth. This was not the work of an ordinary animal. It bore the marks of a monster with a mind and with hatred. At a cafe in town, she met Tyler Galpin, son of Sheriff Donovan Galpin. In the cafe's dim light, their brief but intense conversation marked the first step toward a complicated relationship. When Wendesday asked him to help her escape the school, Tyler's eyes showed both curiosity and hesitation. Just then, Sheriff Galpin appeared and tossed belittling remarks about Nevermore students. Not a flicker crossed Wendesday's face, but she filed the words away in her mind. One night in the forest, she crossed paths with Rowan. In his hand was an old book from his mother. He showed Wendesday a prophecy page. Her silhouette was drawn at the heart of a dark future. Rowan believed Wendesday was destined to destroy the world. In a fury, he tried to choke her with telekinetic power. Wendesday's breath hitched, anger sparking in her eyes. Just as she was about to pass out, a massive shadow lunged from the depths of the forest. The creature attacked Rowan. With its claws, it tore him apart as his screams were swallowed by the night. Then, as quickly, the creature vanished. When Wendesday collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, the forest's sinister silence echoed in her ears. In that moment, she realized that what was happening here were not merely the dark secrets of a school. It was the beginning of a far greater danger, enfolding the entire town. Murders, visions, prophecies. All of it converged at a single point, around her. In the closing moments, Wendesday's resolute gaze turned outward through Nevermore's windows. The moon rose with a wan glow among the mists, and a single conviction rang in her mind. She alone would pull back this veil of secrecy. Rules, threats, fears, none of it would stop her. Her path stretched straight into the heart of darkness. The fog blanketing the town in the early morning drifted slowly among Nevermore's stone walls. The grey sky hung over the Gothic towers like a shroud, casting a somber mood over the school. Students walked through the corridors whispering, everyone discussing the ominous rumors from the previous night, because Rowan's disappearance had cast a heavy shadow over the academy. Wendesday, however, sat in her room with her black-covered notebook open, filling the pages with quick, sharp lines of notes. Again and again she saw in her mind Rowan's attack, the telekinetic choking, and then the creature that burst out of the depths of the forest to tear him apart. Every stroke she drew, every word she dropped into her notebook, was really an effort to piece together what lived in her head. Rowan was dead. His scream still echoed in her ears. Yet what was strange was the entirely different thing Principal Weems calmly announced the next day, with her cool voice. Rowan had left the school. That statement sparked an icy suspicion in Wendesday's eyes. However calm and official Weems's voice sounded, there was a strain hidden inside it. Wendesday was sharp enough to spot such lies instantly. They were trying to cover up Rowan's disappearance, but why? These questions repeated in Wendesday's mind like a dark melody. That morning, Enid flitted around the room in her usual colorful clothes, chattering with boundless energy. Wendesday's silence didn't bother her. She was determined to preserve cheer in her own world, but Wendesday's dark eyes never left the notebook. Enid had grown used to her cold manner, yet sometimes she couldn't help being unnerved. Soon enough, Rowan's absence became the talk of the school. Rumors spread quickly among the students. Some whispered that he had really run away. Others murmured about darker things. Bianca threw Wendesday contemptuous glances and added her own snide commentary to the gossip swirling around her. But their words meant nothing to Wendesday. She knew the truth. Rowan was dead, and there was a secret being hidden behind these school walls. That day, Wendesday was sent to therapy for the first time. For the mandatory school session, she met Dr. Valerie Kinbert. With her colorful clothing, warm smile, and a room filled with soothing objects, Dr. Kinbert was a figure utterly at odds with Wendesday's dark world. Calming paintings hung on the walls. Bright peons sat arranged on her desk. In a gentle voice, Kinbert asked Wendesday questions, trying to open up her withdrawn nature. But Wendesday's answers were short, sharp, and often laced with sarcasm. When the doctor asked, "Have you tried writing about your feelings?" Wendesday's reply was icy. "My feelings don't need a pen. They're already strong enough to choke people." Wendesday hated these sessions, but she didn't underestimate the observations hidden among the therapist's questions either. Dr. Kinbert tried to reach into her mind. Each time, Wendesday rebuilt her own peculiar walls. Meanwhile, the school's social atmosphere was also heating up. The tension between her and Bianca rose quickly. An invisible rope was strung between Bianca's haughty airs and Wendesday's defiant gaze. The thing that would snap that rope emerged soon: the Po Cup race. A traditional Nevermore event, the race was a major spectacle where student groups competed in a canoe contest. The lake, decorated with colorful flags, echoed with the students' shouts. Each team was kitted out in outfits bearing their own symbols. Bianca stood out at the front of her group, using her confident gaze to sway everyone around her. Wendesday initially seemed uninterested in participating, but in truth she saw the race as a chance to challenge Bianca. There could be no better stage to crack her superior facade. Enid was hesitant at first, but in the end she joined Wendesday's team. On race day, the lakeside felt like a festival. Students cheered, and even the clouds in the sky seemed to heighten the excitement. Wendesday's eyes were as cold as ever, but inside burned a fierce resolve. Beating Bianca would not only be a personal victory, it would send a message to the rest of the school. When the race began, paddles sliced the water and the boats surged forward. Bianca's team made a strong start. Wednesday's boat at first seemed to lag behind, but Wednesday had a plan. She read the ripples, the direction of the wind, and made her move at the exact right moment. Enid paddled with a mix of fear and adrenaline, but Wednesday's composure rubbed off on her. At one point, Wednesday seized an opportunity to sabotage Bianca's boat. Her cunning extended beyond the simple act of paddling. With calculated maneuvers, she managed to throw Bianca off balance. As the fierce contest continued, the students' cries of excitement rose around the lake. At last, Wednesday's team pulled ahead and won the race. The fury and shock on Bianca's face were the sweetest prize for Wendesday, but the episode was not limited to that victory. In the race's afterglow, new rumors spread through the town's dark forests of more murders. The tightness on Sheriff Galpin's face whispered that this was no ordinary animal attack. Wendesday felt the rightness of her visions once more. In her eyes, everything now connected. Rowan's death, the creature, the secrets buried in the town's history. At the end of the episode, as Wendesday jotted fresh notes in her notebook, an icy determination gleamed in her eyes. She was no longer just a student. She was a hunter walking into the heart of darkness, and that path would pull her deeper still into the veil of secrets. The grey sky covering Nevermore spread an ominous air over the academy in the early morning hours. As students rushed through the stone corridors, they were all aware of one thing. Rowan's absence was no longer a whispered secret in the shadows, but a gaping void out in the open. Principal Weems's announcement that Rowan left the school was not enough to suppress the suspicions of the students. The dark intuition inside Wendesday had already torn this lie apart. She could not deny what her own eyes had seen. Rowan had been ripped apart in the forest by a savage creature, but the focus of this episode was not only Rowan. The school was preparing for one of its most important annual events, Outreach Day. Nevermore students were expected to go to Jericho and appear in harmony with the townsfolk, spending a day working side by side with them. For Weems, this event seemed like a way to reduce the tension between the two sides. But for Wendesday, it was a unique opportunity to uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows of the town. That morning, in her announcement, Weems explained the project students would participate in. The vampires would help with a blood drive, the sirens would perform at the town's history museum, and other students would work in small shops around Jericho. Wendesday's assignment was to go to a town museum called Pilgrim World with Enid. When she heard this, Wendesday's face showed a look of disdain. This showy place, decorated with Puritan costumes and props from the past, was nothing more than a factory of lies in her eyes. The stories portraying Joseph Crackstone, the town's founder, as a hero clashed with her instincts. Her intuition whispered that Crackstone actually had a dark past, a legacy soaked in blood. Enid, on the other hand, was excited for the event. For her, going down to the town, shopping, meeting people, it was all a fun adventure. But Wendesday's dark gaze extinguished all her cheer. The buses left Nevermore and drove toward Jericho's narrow streets. The town, with its old wooden houses, narrow lanes and the white church in the square, resembled a typical American small town. But Wendesday's eyes saw the rot hidden behind this decoration. Every corner reminded her of bloody stories buried in the past. When the students spread out into the town, Wendesday and Enid stood at the entrance of Pilgrim World. Inside, the scene was a tourist spectacle. Figures made of straw, fake kitchen utensils, volunteers acting out historical reenactments. Everything was arranged to make the town's past look bright and innocent. As Wendesday moved through the crowd like a shadow in her black clothes, the tour guide explained Crackstone's heroic deeds. Wendesday listened with sharp irony. The words that came from her lips pushed the group into silence. "What you're telling is nothing but the glorification of a murderer." The guide's face tightened, and the students stared at her in shock. But Wendesday didn't care. For her, these words were just the beginning of the truth. During the museum tour, Wendesday saw Tyler working at the town's coffee shop. Tyler's smile was like the only warmth in Jericho's gloomy atmosphere. Even Wendesday's dark gaze couldn't completely extinguish that smile. Their dialogue was filled with Wendesday's cold humor. When Tyler tried to offer her coffee, her response was icy. "I don't drink coffee." But it's tragicomic how mortals need caffeine just to stay on their feet. Tyler didn't mind her harshness. For him, Wendesday's strangeness was intriguing. That brief moment between them was the first spark of a bond that would grow in later episodes. As the museum tour continued, Wendesday discovered some old documents hidden in a corner. These were records from the town's founding years. The writings bearing Joseph Crackstone's name portrayed him as a hero in the eyes of the townspeople. But between the lines, another story was hidden. Wendesday realized that Crackstone was filled with hatred toward those who were different. Witches, sorcerers, the outcasts. His goal was to cleanse the town. This truth confirmed her suspicion. Jericho's history was written not with innocence, but with blood. At that moment, a vision darkened Wendesday's eyes. She collapsed to the ground, her breathing quickened. Images flooded her mind. Crackstone burning people in the town square, accusing them of witchcraft, women screaming, flames rising, and most importantly, her own ancestor Goody Adams looking straight into her eyes. Goody's voice echoed in her mind. "In your blood lies our vengeance. It is your destiny to reveal the truth." When the vision ended, Wendesday was drenched in cold sweat. But the determination in her eyes had only grown stronger. As Outreach Day went on, Wendesday found herself once again face to face with Bianca. Bianca, using the allure of her siren blood, charmed everyone around her. But Wendesday scorned this artificial charm and challenged her with cutting words. The tension between them was turning into one of the greatest rivalries in Nevermore. Bianca's eyes burned with anger, clashing with Wendesday's icy stare. This was not just a personal feud, but a battle that would shape the school's balance of power. By late afternoon, students and townsfolk gathered in Jericho's square. But there was an invisible tension in the air. Some of the townspeople disliked the Nevermore students. They saw them as freaks. Especially families tied to the church considered this event nothing more than an obligatory display. At that moment, some local youths began to provoke Wendesday and her friends. The verbal insults grew louder. Wendesday's single sentence froze the atmosphere. Attacking what they fear is nothing but a way for people to hide their own weakness. The local youths walked away in anger, but there was a glimmer of scorn in Wendesday's eyes. She didn't care about their hatred. What interested her was the truth hidden behind Crackstone. The climax of the episode came at night. As Wendesday walked alone at the edge of the town, she heard ominous sounds from the depths of the forest. Cracking branches, heavy footsteps, a guttural growl. Suddenly, a massive creature leapt out of the shadows. Its claws glistened in the moonlight. Its eyes burned with a crimson glow. Wendesday stepped back a few paces, but instead of fear, there was determination. The creature stared into her eyes for a few seconds, then slipped back into the forest. Wendesday took a deep breath. The existence of that creature proved her visions were real. This was the thing that killed Rowan, and this creature was not an ordinary beast, but the shadow of a greater secret. At the end of the episode, Wendesday returned to her room. She opened her notebook and wrote new lines one by one. The true face of Crackstone Goody Adams's warning, the dark history of the town, the creature's eyes, the pages of her notebook carried the knots of her mind. And on the last line she wrote, "Friend or foe, they all wear masks, but I am here to tear the masks away." The camera drifted out through the window. Moonlight draped the forest in a gray veil. A silhouette moved among the shadows, the creature. Its presence was the herald that this story was only the beginning. As the sun disappeared behind the Gothic towers of Nevermore, an unusual liveliness filled the school's corridors. On the faces of the students, both excitement and nervousness could be read. Because that night, One of the most anticipated events of the school was about to take place: the Raven Dance. In this gloomy school surrounded by black stone walls, this annual ball was an excuse for students to brighten their gothic world, if only for a night. But for Wendesday, it was nothing more than a meaningless display. The only thing that occupied her mind was the identity of the creature she had seen in the forest, and the truth behind Rowan's death. While most students were trying on their dresses in their rooms, Enid was full of impatient joy. On her bed lay heaps of colorful dresses, bright pink, turquoise, glittering and cheerful patterns that reflected her vibrant personality. Standing in front of the mirror brushing her hair, she glanced at Wendesday. But Wendesday was seated at her desk in the corner, scribbling in her notebook. Black ink left sharp lines across the pages, her notes painting an ever-darkening picture. "Wendesday, aren't you going to make any preparations for tonight?" Enid asked, disappointment lacing her tone. Without lifting her eyes from the notebook, Wendesday replied in a cold voice, "Wrapping oneself in shiny fabrics to live a lie is not for me. If the night is to be spent with fake smiles and contrived dances, it means nothing to me." Enid pursed her lips and fell silent. For her, this night was special. Part of her hoped she could break through Wendesday's hardened shell, but Wendesday's mind was fixed on Xavier's strange behavior. The drawings in his studio, filled with monstrous creatures, overlapped too perfectly with the visions she had seen. To her, Xavier had either seen the creature with his own eyes, or knew far more than he admitted. During the day, she went to Xavier's studio. The walls were once again covered with terrifying sketches: claws, bloodstains, torn bodies. As her gaze lingered on one painting, her sharp voice cut through the silence. "For you to draw this in such detail, imagination alone isn't enough. You know the truth." Xavier turned to her, his face showing both anger and exhaustion. "How many times do I have to tell you? I have visions. I draw what I see, but you're always accusing me." Wendesday's cold eyes never wavered. "If you're guilty, one day you'll slip, and I'll be waiting for that." Her constant investigations unsettled Principal Weems. When she was summoned to her office, the anger on Weems's face was clear. "This school has rules. Your reckless behavior is endangering the safety of the students, especially tonight. If you start trouble at the Raven Dance, if you disrupt the peace..." A mocking smile curled on Wendesday's lips. "Don't worry. If peace is broken, it won't be because of me. When the truth comes out, everyone will get what they deserve." Weems took a deep breath, lowering her gaze. Wendesday's sharp wit and stubbornness always cornered her. Later that day, Wendesday found a chance to slip into town. At the coffee shop, Tyler was there. His presence brought an odd warmth to the otherwise dreary atmosphere of Jericho. When he saw Wendesday, he smiled. "Are you going to the dance tonight?" he asked. Her gaze was frozen. "Watching people sway rhythmically for amusement reminds me of a death dance." Tyler smirked softly. "You should go anyway. Maybe it'll be different from what you think. We could go together if you want." For a brief moment, Wendesday hesitated. She didn't want to acknowledge the strange feeling that stirred inside her, but she didn't refuse his offer. Back at school, preparations for the dance continued. Once again, Wendesday and Bianca crossed paths. Bianca had used her siren allure to invite Xavier to the dance, her eyes filled with both challenge and superiority. Wendesday couldn't let it slide. "Controlling others by enchanting them doesn't make you strong," she said. Bianca's eyes gleamed. "But it leaves you alone, and that's your greatest weakness." The tension between them remained at words that time, but within the walls of Nevermore, it was clear this rivalry would only grow stronger. When night fell, the great hall of the school was transformed. Between the black stone walls, neon lights flickered, fog machines hissed, shimmering decorations glimmered. The Gothic-themed dance had turned into a festival where the students' dark personalities shone. Music filled the air and everyone was dancing. When Enid entered the hall in her bright dress, she sparkled. Xavier danced beside Bianca, while other students celebrated in their own groups. Tyler, however, couldn't take his eyes off Wendesday. And finally, Wendesday walked in. In her plain yet elegant black dress, she drew every eye. Her face was expressionless, but her presence captivated everyone. Tyler approached her and held out his hand. "Would you dance with me?" Wendesday hesitated briefly, then gave a small nod. When the music changed, the stage became entirely hers. Her dance was unlike anyone else's, sharp, jagged, strange, and hypnotic. She swung her arms with force, stamped her feet on the stone floor, opened and closed her eyes with ritualistic precision. While the entire hall watched entranced, even Tyler couldn't look away. As Enid and the other students looked on in amazement, Bianca's lips curled into a mocking smile. But Wendesday's dance soon became a scene that would etch itself into everyone's memory. Yet even as the night progressed, suspicion never left Wendesday's mind. She kept watching Xavier. His disappearances, his mysterious looks, his talk of visions, it all fed a single thought. Could Xavier be the creature? At that moment, Xavier slipped out. Wendesday followed. Sneaking into his studio once again, she found more drawings of the creature. The bloody details in the sketches made them even more horrifying. Her suspicion was almost certain now. Back in the hall, students were still dancing. Just as everyone was enjoying the night, suddenly red liquid poured down from the ceiling. At first, the students thought it was a prank, maybe colored water. But as the metallic scent spread through the room, the truth became clear. It was a liquid mixed with blood. Screams filled the hall. Students panicked and fled. Bright dresses were stained with crimson. Wendesday's face showed no fear, only anger and determination. This was a planned attack. In that moment, Wendesday ran outside. At the edge of the forest, she saw the creature's shadow once again. Its claws glinted in the moonlight. For a few seconds, they locked eyes. Then the beast disappeared back into the darkness, leaving Wendesday's resolve stronger than ever. The night ended in chaos. Students, covered in bloodstains, rushed in panic back to their dorms. Principal Weems struggled to restore order, while Wendesday retreated to her room. She opened her notebook, slashing the pages with sharp strokes of her pen. The creature is still among us. Xavier's secrets, Tyler's stares, Bianca's games, all of them are masks. But I'm here to tear away the masks. The truth will come out sooner or later. The camera drifted out through the window. In the shadows of the forest, the creature appeared once again. Its eyes glowed red. This war was only just beginning. As the first light of morning filtered through Nevermore's tall windows, a different kind of bustle stirred in the school's stone corridors. With its quiet Gothic air, the academy always felt cut off from the outside world. But today it would open its doors to families. Family Visit Day was one of the most special events of the year. Students would reunite with their loved ones, and for a while, color and sound from the outside would seep into the school's mysterious walls. Yet while this day meant longing and excitement for everyone else, for Wendesday it meant only a new test, a new tension. Because her family was anything but ordinary. A large crowd had gathered in the courtyard. Colorful umbrellas had been opened. Stone tables were decorated. Some students excitedly opened the gifts their mothers brought. Some showed their fathers the projects they had worked on, and others simply embraced with longing. Whispers, laughter, and voices full of affection rose toward the sky. Wendesday stood alone at the very end of the line. She looked as if she'd turned to stone inside her black coat. Not a flicker crossed her face. As she watched the others' excitement, her eyes were cold and expressionless. And then, a familiar family emerged from the crowd. A graceful, somber woman in a black dress. She held her head high, her gaze both cool and imbued with a stately authority. This was Morticia Adams. Beside her walked a short, energetic man, whose theatrical gestures and sparkling eyes were full of passion, Gomez Adams. Just behind them, a slightly shy boy with a mischievous glint in his eye, little brother Pugsley. The moment the Adams family stepped into the courtyard, the mood shifted. Other families began to whisper, and glances circled back to them. Morticia's elegance and Gomez's exuberant energy stood out easily among the ordinary families. When Wendesday saw them, not the slightest change crossed her face. No longing, no joy. She stepped forward in measured strides, her eyes never leaving her mother. As Morticia approached, a delicate smile appeared. "My dear daughter," she said, her voice as soft as silk and just as commanding. Gomez opened his arms wide to hug Wendesday, but her hard, distant look stopped him mid-step. Pugsley offered his sister a brief smile. In the dining hall, families gathered around a long table. The atmosphere was crowded, cheerful, and lively, yet the corner where the Adamses sat drew everyone's attention. Gomez laughed loudly, while Morticia's quiet, graceful poise cast a shadow over those around her. Wendesday remained silent at the table. She was not preoccupied with the food, but with the look in her mother's eyes. Morticia kept speaking of the past, of her own days at Nevermore. "I had visions too," she said, her tone calm but meaningful. "What you see is not unfamiliar to me." Wendesday pressed her lips together. A spark of anger flared within her. Her mother, invoking her own visions, felt like being overshadowed. Independence meant everything to Wendesday. She didn't want to walk in her mother's footsteps. She wanted to cut her own path. But Morticia's presence pressed down on her like a chain. Just then, the dining hall doors opened. A stern, cold man in uniform entered. Sheriff Donovan Galpin, his eyes fixed directly on Gomez. The murmur at the table fell away. Speaking loudly, the sheriff declared, "The person responsible for a murder committed here years ago is still among us." The air froze. Students and families fell silent. Wendesday's eyes narrowed as the sheriff's gaze settled on Gomez. "In your youth, you were responsible for the death of Garrett Gates," he said. A wave of whispers rippled through the hall. Gomez's face fell for an instant. Then he rose with his signature theatrical flourish, but this time his voice was more serious. "I protected my family." A deep shadow crossed Morticia's face. Wendesday didn't take her eyes off either of them. A cold resolve rose within her. She had to uncover the truth behind the accusation against her father. The next day, down in town, the sheriff took Gomez into custody. In front of a crowd, he was led away in handcuffs. Morticia tried to stand tall, but the gloom on her face betrayed her. Pugsley watched with worry, while Wendesday's face did not so much as twitch. Inside, however, she burned with anger. In that moment, she made her decision. She would solve this secret. Wendesday began to investigate. In the library stacks, in the town's dusty records among old documents, the name Garrett Gates surfaced often. He belonged to a family that had long harbored enmity toward the Adamses. The records suggested he had been obsessively attached to Morticia. There were signs that the fight that night had been the result of that obsession. When Wendesday confronted her mother, Morticia revealed part of the truth. Garrett had pursued her, threatened her. That night, things had gotten out of hand and Garrett had died. But as long as Morticia kept silent, Gomez had taken the blame. Wendesday looked straight into her mother's eyes. "So you've kept this secret for years." "To protect father." Morticia's gaze was heavy. "To protect our family." Wendesday's anger swelled. For her, this was not merely a family matter. Finding the truth was choosing her own way. That night, Wendesday and Thing slipped into the town cemetery. Moonlight washed over cracked stones, and the wind sent a moan through the old grave markers. Wendesday took up a shovel while Thing clawed at the earth. When they opened Garrett's grave, a cold, heavy silence fell. As she lifted the coffin lid, a sharp smell seeped out. With gloved hands, Wendesday touched the bones. As she examined them, she noticed a strange sheen. Garrett's bones glimmered with a bluish glow. It was proof he'd been poisoned. Garrett had already been on the brink of death. Gomez was not responsible for his demise. The next day, Wendesday presented the evidence she had found. The hard set of the sheriff's face cracked. Gomez's innocence was now clear. Behind Garrett's death lay obsession, poison, and dark secrets. The shadow that had hung over the Addams family for years finally lifted. When Gomez was released, Morticia's eyes held both relief and sorrow. Pugsley wanted to throw his arms around his sister in joy, but Wendesday's expression remained unchanged. In the final scene, Wendesday was alone with her mother. Morticia looked into her daughter's eyes. "You are following in my footsteps. I had visions too. Your fate is tied to mine." Wendesday's eyes flashed like ice. "No, my fate is my own. I won't remain in your shadow." She opened her notebook and wrote sharp sentences across the page. "I have learned my family's secrets. But this path is not theirs. I will chart my own." As the camera pulled back, the Addams family stood together again. But only one thing shone in Wendesday's eyes: independence. She was now the traveler of her own destiny. As the first light of morning filtered through Nevermore's tall windows, a different kind of bustle stirred in the school's stone corridors. With its quiet Gothic air, the academy always felt cut off from the outside world, but today it would open its doors to families. Family Visit Day was one of the most special events of the year. Students would reunite with their loved ones, and for a while, color and sound from the outside would seep into the school's mysterious walls. Yet while this day meant longing and excitement for everyone else, for Wendesday it meant only a new test, a new tension. Because her family was anything but ordinary. A large crowd had gathered in the courtyard. Colorful umbrellas had been opened. Stone tables were decorated. Some students excitedly opened the gifts their mothers brought. Some showed their fathers the projects they had worked on, and others simply embraced with longing. Whispers, laughter, and voices full of affection rose toward the sky. Wendesday stood alone at the very end of the line. She looked as if she'd turned to stone inside her black coat. Not a flicker crossed her face. As she watched the others' excitement, her eyes were cold and expressionless. And then, a familiar family emerged from the crowd. A graceful, somber woman in a black dress. She held her head high, her gaze both cool and imbued with a stately authority. This was Morticia Addams. Beside her walked a short, energetic man, whose theatrical gestures and sparkling eyes were full of passion, Gomez Addams. Just behind them, a slightly shy boy with a mischievous glint in his eye, little brother Pugsley. The moment the Addams family stepped into the courtyard, the mood shifted. Other families began to whisper, and glances circled back to them. Morticia's elegance and Gomez's exuberant energy stood out easily among the ordinary families. When Wendesday saw them, not the slightest change crossed her face. No longing, no joy. She stepped forward in measured strides, her eyes never leaving her mother. As Morticia approached, a delicate smile appeared. "My dear daughter," she said, her voice as soft as silk and just as commanding. Gomez opened his arms wide to hug Wendesday, but her hard, distant look stopped him mid-step. Pugsley offered his sister a brief smile. In the dining hall, families gathered around a long table. The atmosphere was crowded, cheerful, and lively, yet the corner where the Addamses sat drew everyone's attention. Gomez laughed loudly, while Morticia's quiet, graceful poise cast a shadow over those around her. Wendesday remained silent at the table. She was not preoccupied with the food, but with the look in her mother's eyes. Morticia kept speaking of the past, of her own days at Nevermore. "I had visions too," she said, her tone calm but meaningful. "What you see is not unfamiliar to me." Wendesday pressed her lips together. A spark of anger flared within her. Her mother, invoking her own visions, felt like being overshadowed. Independence meant everything to Wendesday. She didn't want to walk in her mother's footsteps. She wanted to cut her own path. But Morticia's presence pressed down on her like a chain. Just then, the dining hall doors opened. A stern, cold man in uniform entered. Sheriff Donovan Galpin, his eyes fixed directly on Gomez. The murmur at the table fell away. Speaking loudly, the sheriff declared, "The person responsible for a murder committed here years ago is still among us." The air froze. Students and families fell silent. Wednesday's eyes narrowed as the sheriff's gaze settled on Gomez. "In your youth, you were responsible for the death of Garrett Gates," he said. A wave of whispers rippled through the hall. Gomez's face fell for an instant. Then he rose with his signature theatrical flourish, but this time his voice was more serious. "I protected my family." A deep shadow crossed Morticia's face. Wednesday didn't take her eyes off either of them. A cold resolve rose within her. She had to uncover the truth behind the accusation against her father. The next day, down in town, the sheriff took Gomez into custody. In front of a crowd, he was led away in handcuffs. Morticia tried to stand tall, but the gloom on her face betrayed her. Pugsley watched with worry, while Wednesday's face did not so much as twitch. Inside, however, she burned with anger. In that moment, she made her decision. She would solve this secret. Wednesday began to investigate. In the library stacks, in the town's dusty records among old documents, the name Garrett Gates surfaced often. He belonged to a family that had long harbored enmity toward the Adamses. The records suggested he had been obsessively attached to Morticia. There were signs that the fight that night had been the result of that obsession. When Wednesday confronted her mother, Morticia revealed part of the truth. Garrett had pursued her, threatened her. That night things had gotten out of hand and Garrett had died. But as long as Morticia kept silent, Gomez had taken the blame. Wednesday looked straight into her mother's eyes. "So you've kept this secret for years?" "To protect father." Morticia's gaze was heavy. "To protect our family." Wednesday's anger swelled. For her, this was not merely a family matter. Finding the truth was choosing her own way. That night, Wednesday and Thing slipped into the town cemetery. Moonlight washed over cracked stones, and the wind sent a moan through the old grave markers. Wednesday took up a shovel while Thing clawed at the earth. When they opened Garrett's grave, a cold, heavy silence fell. As she lifted the coffin lid, a sharp smell seeped out. With gloved hands, Wednesday touched the bones. As she examined them, she noticed a strange sheen. Garrett's bones glimmered with a bluish glow. It was proof he'd been poisoned. Garrett had already been on the brink of death. Gomez was not responsible for his demise. The next day, Wednesday presented the evidence she had found. The hard set of the sheriff's face cracked. Gomez's innocence was now clear. Behind Garrett's death lay obsession, poison, and dark secrets. The shadow that had hung over the Adams family for years finally lifted. When Gomez was released, Morticia's eyes held both relief and sorrow. Pugsley wanted to throw his arms around his sister in joy, but Wednesday's expression remained unchanged. In the final scene, Wednesday was alone with her mother. Morticia looked into her daughter's eyes. "You are following in my footsteps. I had visions too. Your fate is tied to mine." Wednesday's eyes flashed like ice. "No, my fate is my own. I won't remain in your shadow." She opened her notebook and wrote sharp sentences across the page. "I have learned my family's secrets. But this path is not theirs. I will chart my own." As the camera pulled back, the Adams family stood together again. But only one thing shone in Wednesday's eyes: independence. She was now the traveler of her own destiny. The stone walls of Nevermore looked even more oppressive under the weight of winter. The grey sky was thick with black clouds, and the wind's howl echoed through the school's gothic towers. Students whispered as they wandered the halls, all haunted by the same fear: the Hyde. The creature roaming the town's dark forests had already claimed many lives, and it still moved freely. Wednesday sat at her journal. The black notebook's pages had lately filled with more sketches, more bloodstains, more darkness. As the sharp tip of her pen carved lines as hard as stone, only one thing consumed her mind: the truth. The secret behind the monster, Tyler's increasingly shadowed side, Xavier's constant warnings, and above all, Goody Adams's words in her visions. Everything was starting to connect. That morning, raised voices from Principal Weems's office filled the dormitory corridor. Wendesday and Enid paused to listen. Weems was arguing with Sheriff Galpin. The sheriff's voice rang with fury. "You can't let that girl keep sticking her nose into this. Things are getting worse. People in town are on the verge of revolt." Weems's reply was calm but firm. "Wendesday is a student with special abilities. She's not easy to stop. And sometimes it takes a brave eye to uncover the truth." Hearing this through the door, a faint curl tugged at the corner of Wendesday's lips. Even if Weems tried to rein her in, she knew the principal needed her abilities. At the small-town cafe, Wendesday met Tyler again. In the dim lights, with the scent of coffee in the air and the silence of falling snow outside, the atmosphere between them was tense but magnetic. Tyler looked at her. "Sometimes I don't understand you. Why do you walk into the darkness so easily?" Wendesday's eyes were steady, her voice like ice. "Because the darkness is already inside me. I can't run from it. So I follow it." Tyler hesitated, lost in her piercing gaze. He reached out to touch her hand and she did not pull away. An invisible bond stretched taut between them. In his eyes lay both admiration and fear. Meanwhile, Xavier was once again sketching the monster in his workshop. His brush moved fast, trembling, as if each stroke carried the traces of a vision. When Wendesday entered, the crimson eyes on the canvas stared back at her. "You can't keep ignoring this," Xavier said. "The creature is real, and I keep seeing it." Wendesday's gaze stayed locked on the canvas. "Or maybe you don't just see the monster. Maybe you're connected to it." Xavier's face tightened with anger. "Stop coming after me and try to see the real enemy." But in Wendesday's mind, the suspicion only grew stronger. One night, her vision struck again. Darkness swallowed her sight. As she walked through the mist, Goody Adams appeared once more, her eyes blazing like fire. "The hide is not alone," she said firmly. "There is a master, someone who controls, someone who commands. Unless you find the master, you cannot break the creature's chains." When Goody's hands touched her forehead, bloody visions flooded her mind. People screaming in the town streets, torn bodies, stone walls drenched in red. Wendesday woke with a gasp, breathless in her bed. In the dim room, Enid slept deeply. But Wendesday was now certain. She had to prove the hide wasn't acting alone. By morning, Enid was still hurt. She had tried to celebrate Wendesday's birthday, only to be met with an impenetrable wall of coldness. "Being your friend is the hardest thing in the world," she said sadly. Wendesday, without looking at her, scribbled in her journal. Tears welled in Enid's eyes. "Sometimes I wish I'd never met you," she whispered before storming out. Wendesday's pen didn't stop, but for the first time a faint shadow crossed her face. She felt deep inside just how heavy loneliness could be. In town, another murder had shaken everyone. Sheriff Galpin, furious, addressed the press. When Wendesday appeared among the crowd, his fury turned to her. "Enough. You're connected to these cases. You're always there at the scene. This can't be a coincidence." Amid the stares of the crowd, Wendesday didn't waver. Coincidence is the word the powerless cling to. Those who refuse to see the truth use it as an excuse. "But I see the truth, Sheriff. You just don't want to." The crowd whispered, and the sheriff's face flushed red, but Wendesday's cold stare silenced him. That night, she met Tyler in secret again. On the town's stone bridge, under the pale glow of the moonlight, they stood together. Tyler's eyes searched hers. "I want to help you, but you never let me in." Wendesday watched him in silence, then stepped closer. The distance between them vanished. When their lips met, the wind scattered the leaves. For Wendesday, it was a moment of weakness, but also of suspicion. Because in Tyler's eyes, something dark flickered. Back in the dorm at the end of the episode, Wendesday opened her journal and wrote, "The hide's mask is about to fall. When I find its master, the entire game will collapse. But the darkness hides in the eyes of those closest to me." Tyler's smile, Xavier's warnings, Enid's tears, all are fragments of the same shadow. By candlelight, the notebook's pages flickered. Wendesday looked out the window. The forest disappeared into the mist. Darkness draped over it like a shroud. Yet her eyes gleamed, because now she knew the truth was very close, and she would risk everything to reach it. The night that descended upon the town was heavier than ordinary darkness. The sky was covered with black clouds, and the howl of the wind echoed between the old stone buildings. Nevermore's Gothic towers loomed like giant shadows in this oppressive scene, their dimly lit windows only deepening the gloom. That night it wasn't just the students, but the entire town that seemed to hold its breath. Because at last, the curtain of secrets was about to be lifted. Wendesday sat at the edge of her bed with her black notebook in hand. Its pages had been filled for days with bloody sketches and dark notes. Every line marked another step deeper into the labyrinth of her mind. The suspicion born from Tyler's kiss, the shadowy clues in her visions, Xavier's warnings and Goody Adams's echoing words, all converged into one point. The truth could no longer be hidden. She set down her pen and rose to her feet. As she walked the silent stone corridor, the echo of her steps bounced off the walls like the beat of a grim drum. Just then she came face to face with Xavier. His eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, his hands still stained with paint. "You should have listened to me," he said, his voice full of anger and frustration. "I told you there was something about Tyler, but you always turned on me." Wendesday's gaze was icy. "Because you had your secrets too, but yes, you were right." For a brief moment, surprise flashed across Xavier's face. In that instant, they were united by the same goal: to expose the Hyde's true identity. When Wendesday finally cornered Tyler, the tension was so thick it was almost tangible. The darkness hidden behind his innocent eyes was at last revealed. As they stood face to face, the words that fell from his lips confirmed every suspicion. "Took you long enough to figure me out." His eyes glowed crimson, and a feral grin spread across his face. He was no ordinary boy anymore. He was the Hyde. In that moment, everything Wendesday had seen in her visions aligned: the bloody tracks, the torn bodies, the terrifying screams. All had taken shape in Tyler's shadow, but for Wendesday this was only the beginning. Goody Adams's warning still rang in her mind. The Hyde was not alone. He had a master, someone pulling the strings from behind the curtain. The truth surfaced soon enough. The woman who had posed as the kind teacher Thornhill, who had befriended students with such ease, was in fact Laurel Gates. Thought long dead, she had returned to avenge her family. Behind her calm demeanor lay suffocating resentment and icy hatred. Laurel's plan was chilling in its scope: to resurrect Joseph Crackstone, the zealot who centuries ago had sworn to annihilate witches and all those who were different, to unleash his hatred and curse upon the world once more. By the time Wendesday and the others uncovered Laurel's secret, it was already too late to turn back. Laurel had completed her preparations, using Tyler's Hyde form to clear away every obstacle in her path. That night, the old graveyard outside town shook with a dark ritual. Laurel muttered ancient incantations under the glow of torches as a hollow moan rose from beneath the earth. Stones cracked and dust and bones spewed upward. The rotting pieces of a body slowly reassembled under the force of her spell. From the shadows, Wendesday watched, her heart pounding though her face betrayed no emotion. Her eyes held only sharp determination. The moment she had seen countless times in her visions was unfolding before her. At last, Joseph Crackstone's body stood upright. His eyes blazed with hatred. From his decayed lips came words that rumbled like thunder. "I will destroy them all. The witches, the outcasts, every last one." With his voice, a cold wind swept into the town square, striking fear into every heart. At the same time, a different miracle was taking place at Nevermore. Enid finally faced the wolf side she had suppressed for so long. That night, the chains broke. Her body convulsed, bones cracked, nails lengthened into claws. With a piercing scream under the silver moonlight, she transformed into a full werewolf. Her howl echoed across the forest and town. She was no longer just Wendesday's cheerful roommate. She had become the most vital part of the coming battle, the only force strong enough to stand against the Hyde had been born within her. A terrifying clash erupted in the town's stone streets. Tyler's hide form, his eyes glowing red, slashed his claws through the air. Enid fought back with all her strength. Claws struck stone, teeth sank into flesh, and screams rose into the night sky. The watching students recoiled in fear, but in their eyes also flickered a spark of hope. Enid was not yielding to the hide. From afar, Wendesday watched the struggle, her focus already shifting to Joseph Crackstone. He was the true enemy. With resolute steps, Wendesday confronted him. The stench of his rotten breath was like poison. "You're an Adams," Crackstone spat with fury. "Because of your ancestors' blood, you carry this curse." Wendesday's eyes gleamed with cold fire. "I choose my own fate, not your rotted hatred." The battle was inevitable. Crackstone's hands crackled with sorcery as he hurled his spells. Wendesday dodged skillfully, striking back with her dagger. One spell struck her chest and she fell, blood trickling from her lips. Yet still her eyes showed no fear. Then Goody Adams's spirit appeared within her mind. Her ancestor's voice guided her. "You are not alone. Our blood runs with you. Rise." Wendesday closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and rose once more. The dagger glinted in the moonlight. As Crackstone lunged with another attack, Wendesday drove the blade into his chest with all her strength. The corpse man shrieked, his body cracking, the red light fading from his eyes. With one last look of hatred, he crumbled into ash and sank into the earth. At the same time, Enid made her final move against the hide. Her claws raked across Tyler's chest. The beast collapsed unconscious. Enid staggered back, panting, her eyes wild with instinct's fire. Slowly, trembling, she shifted back into human form. Exhausted but standing tall, the town square fell silent. Smoke from torches drifted upward, and the wind carried the ashes away. Students clung to one another. Teachers exhaled in weary relief. Principal Weems's eyes held both exhaustion and relief. Laurel Gates was finally defeated. Her plan lay in ruins, her legacy of hate buried once more. Wendesday retrieved her fallen notebook. With bloody hands, she turned the pages. Her face showed no emotion, but in her eyes burned a sharper light than ever before. The war was over, but for her it was merely a new chapter. She wrote a single line: "Truth never dies. It only finds new paths in the shadows." Under the moonlight, she walked alone, leaving behind ruin, blood, and ash. Ahead stretched an uncertain future, but her footsteps carried the rhythm of her own destiny. Amid death, battle, and secrets, Wendesday Adams once again stood unbroken.